to the Book of Mormon Evidence podcast with host Rod Meldrum. This is part 2 of the podcast with Steve Smoot. This week's Come Follow Me supplemental study is Lesson 44, Ether 1 through 5. Rend that veil of unbelief. We welcome our guest, Stephen Smoot, who has been an invited speaker at the European Union and at many World Congress of Family events. He actually was helpful in bringing the World Congress on Families to Salt Lake City in 2015, where Elder Ballard spoke, as well as many other special guests. Stephen has also spoken at many ancient origin conferences on the silence and science surrounding America's ancient civilizations. Steve and his lovely wife Kathy have 9 children and 25 grandchildren. Welcome, Steve Smoot.
That started, us asking ourselves the question. Isn't this America's antiquities that we're talking about? Isn't this something that should be preserved? And who was in the position to pull that trigger and to say, this is something, that should be destroyed?
I remember that you actually had a couple different pages. You pointed to the page like this and said, well, could we go see this one? He says, well, no, that's been destroyed. Come over here. Could we go see this one? Well, no, that's been destroyed. And then I'll never forget, because you said, you looked up at him and said, why hasn't this been preserved?
Yes.
And he literally kind of rocked back on his heels and he said, that is a really good question.
And it's really interesting because if you look at both of these surveys, the one survey was done in 1823 by order of Thomas Jefferson, who saw what was coming. First of all, you need to understand that 1823 is a very significant date. That is where the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the Indians didn't really have rights to the land, okay? They had the right of occupancy, but they didn't have the right of ownership to the land. And the reason given was they saw the Indians, okay, as savages. And they basically, what was handed down, that the Indians hadn't evolved to the state of a full human. And so that understanding, okay, was taken from them.
So where did this come from, this idea about evolution and evolving and so forth?
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, as we look at, what happens with these early men in science and government in the 1800s, namely Lewis Henry Morgan, who was the American father of anthropology, he came up with the stages of human evolution, which really viewed the Indians as savages. He viewed, the fundamental religionists as barbaric on this progression towards a civilized state.
Ultimately, to get up to what they call civilized.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's really important. And these early men in science and government, you really need to come to understand. Because even though we find these
this book.
giant, that we come to understand what happened and how the American Indian and this ancient history has been taken from us. Now, one site, okay, another site that we visited, and jumping around that Rod took us to was the Miamisburg Mound site in Ross County, Ohio. And
let's see if we can insert some nice video footage of this place, because it's so beautiful while we talk about it here.
Yes, but many of the early settlers and explorers believed in a lost race, because they didn't really believe that the American Indian, as viewed as a savage culture, would be capable of the sustained effort that's needed to quarry tons of earth. And the Miamisburg Mound is huge. It's 68 feet high, okay? It's over 852 feet in circumference. You have over 311,000 cubic yards, of soil that was moved. That's about 20,000 wagon loads of dirt, by the way. And in addition to that, okay, there's over 100 giant earthen constructions in Ross County, Ohio alone.
Yeah, just in that county.
And that's a real concentration, okay, of these ancient mound building cultures. And the other thing is that that connects all of these, a lot of these earthen constructions, is a 60-mile long road that was made of cement-like materials. That was created. That there's an interconnection of this. I mean,
it ran from Chillicothe, Ohio, up to Newark, Ohio.
Yeah, there isn't evidence, to support, more highly advanced civilizations. How do you get the manpower to create these giant iconic mounds that you find? It is absolutely amazing. And if you look in the plat at the very front of this, you notice that the date that's given here is from 1000 BC to 400 AD, which is a pretty interesting correlation to the Book of Mormon timeline.
Pretty much exact.
That was
right in there.
That was given. Yeah. So, I mean, it really is amazing. So to say, that there isn't evidences of more highly advanced cultures, we surely haven't found it. And we have visited, literally hundreds of sites.
Yeah. In fact, we're going to get into a little bit here in just a minute when we bring up your other book here that you brought with you, as how many sites there are.
Yes.
How many different places that they have now discovered over the course of time.
Yeah.
From the early Cyrus Thomas map, which showed about
several hundred.
Well, several thousand actually, different sites there, to what we have now. I'm not gonna spoil it for you though.
Okay. But if they're giant earthen constructions, do we need to come to understanding?
Well, you think about what would it take to have enough people who are free enough with their time that they can basically haul basket loads of dirt day and night for maybe even a couple of years.
Yes.
And on thousands of people. That means there has to be other people who are producing the food, who are producing the clothing, who are taking care of the kids, who are taking care of the families, who are farming and doing all these other things to support that kind of group. That means that you have to have a large infrastructure.
Yes. I just got back from Moundville, Alabama, for example, that you can go and visit. I mean, there are some incredible mound sites there. And there was over 30,000 people, they believed, was part of that community.
But the thing is interesting is the archaeological community has been reluctant to accept the idea that there was large communities and large cities and so forth. They've dragged their feet, even though the evidence is overwhelming, again because of this manifest destiny doctrine problem.
Exactly. Now in Mormon chapter 8, it speaks of the conditions that really led to calamities in their day as a warning for our day. And so that's what's so great about the Book of Mormon, because it gives us understanding of what can happen to cultures and civilizations and the path that it leads to destruction. Now, in verse 2 of chapter 8, Moroni stated that he escaped.
By the way, this is on page 445.
At Cumorah. And that the Nephites who had escaped into the country southward, it's kind of interesting that they escaped southward, were hunted down by the Lamanites until they were either taken in captivity or destroyed.
Because they were all destroyed. Yes. And also he says, my father was killed along with them.
And so what can we learn from both of these civilizations? The Nephite civilizations that were attacked and destroyed, and the Jaredite nation. The forces of corruption that led to their destruction is something that we need to make a study and make sure that we don't duplicate it as we write our history.
So are you thinking that God is serious when he says that you better be righteous while you're on this promised land, or else you're going to have destruction?
Yes. I mean, history repeats itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's already done it 3 times here on this promised land. You have Adam and Eve and their posterity, the Jaredites and their posterity, the Nephites and their posterity, and then you have now us.
Yes.
Meaning U.S.
And what is the path, that we are going down that might lead us there? I mean, do we need to study these pages of the Book of Mormon? Because it gives us a clear understanding of what we need to do. As we are losing our agency, our religious liberties, okay? And that leads, to captivity. It's just another form of captivity. And a lot of what we came to realize is that there was a huge slave trade going on here in the Americas, and that a lot of the work that came about to building, the giant civilizations that you see both North and South America, was done on the yoke of slave labor.
Yeah.
Now, in producing our documentary, The Lost Civilizations of North America, we really did set out to interview some of the foremost scholars that we could find who had studied these ancient mound-building cultures and history. And in so doing, an understanding of this daunting history emerged.
In fact, I got to just break in here just a second. You were able to get some of the top people. I mean, we're talking about 17 different scholars, folks. Only 3 of which are LDS. So out of that 17, 14 of them are not members of our faith, and yet they're talking about this highly advanced, amazing ancient civilization, and the DNA analysis and so forth that go along with that. And this was all documented in this documentary. If you haven't seen it, folks, you got to see it. It's The Lost Civilizations of North America.
Well, we really wanted to interview some of these scholars because we knew that they would be passing. And a lot of them, didn't even come forward to talk about what the silence surrounding these ancient, civilizations until they'd retired. And to be able to capture like the likes of Dr. Roger Kennedy, former director of the American History Museum, and others was really, a record, that we felt like needs to be heard.
Yeah.
And so...
And by the way, all of them, after the documentary was completed, you sent them out to all the different people who were involved with it. They all said, this is wonderful and this is fine. Until I started to promote it as possible evidence for the Book of Mormon. And all of a sudden they were backtracking and backpedaling. And, we didn't mean it. Well, we didn't mean this to be evidence for the Book of Mormon.
There was 2 or 3,
There's a couple of them.
Well, did you? Yeah. And so we've toned it down, and we actually even took out, some of their even stronger statements, that
of how advanced the civilization was.
Yes, but this is a record that really needs to be understood.
A little bit more about these 3 guys.
Yes.
So you have Squire here on the left. You have
Morgan,
and then you have Powell on the right, and so. These 3 guys, I mean, they were all contemporaries of each other.
Yes.
But how do they play into this whole thing?
Yeah. I mean, if you really want to understand and gain an understanding into this larger history, into the silence and science surrounding these ancient cultures, one must really come to understand, the role that these men had in and was what they were doing there in the mid-1800s. As they came together, to form this subset of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, in which, like I pointed out, Morgan and Powell both became president of that organization. Mm-hmm. And they realized that they could address many of the social and political issues facing society there in the 1800s, and that their views into the origin and evolution of man and the origin of these ancient mound-building cultures could be used as a tool for social reform. And in studying E.G. Squire's life, it became very revealing to us that not only, was he being silenced as he started, to come out as a prolific writer and say, hey, everything that I'm finding that's showing, that these were, great civilizations and cultures. But to understand that Lewis Henry Morgan, for example, from Rochester, New York, not far from Palmyra right there, I mean, he was an attorney.
The dating of this is basically the early 1800s. This is, we're talking...
Yeah, mid-1800s, and then they got into it in the later 1800s. Yes. But,
by the way, time frame of Joseph Smith.
Yes, I mean, it is interesting that... John Wesley Powell's father and E.G. Squire's father, I mean, John Wesley's father was a Methodist minister in Palmyra, New York, when the Book of Mormon came off the press. And E.G. Squire's father was a minister, a circuit minister there in the 1800s.
So wait a minute. So you're telling me that these two guys' dads were both ministers in Palmyra, New York, at the same time as the Book of Mormon was coming off of the press there in the Grandin Press in Palmyra.
And they spoke from the same pulpits.
So there's no way that these guys didn't know about the claims of the Book of Mormon of a highly advanced civilization who had roads and cities and so forth. So could it be that they set out to actually disprove the Book of Mormon by saying that this ancient culture never achieved anything close to civilization?
Well, I do believe that they understood it, and they understood the pressures, that were being to bear, that, there weren't highly advanced civilizations here.
Yeah. Well, if they could somehow prove that these civilizations never were ever advanced, then that would kind of undermine what Joseph Smith was saying about these Native Americans here with this highly advanced civilization. So it would undermine Joseph Smith's entire story.
Yes. But some of them had other agendas too. For example, Lewis Henry Morgan, he was an attorney for the mining and the railroad industry.
Okay.
And so it was a major land grab taking place at the time. And so he wanted to
get the Indians out of the way.
Yes, as part of this Manifest Destiny agenda. And John Wesley Powell later, would work for Indian Affairs. In fact, John Wesley Powell's life is very interesting, because it really ties into, he migrated,
kind of parallels with the church.
Yes, I mean, he kind of shadowed the migration of the saints westward. In fact, if you look at his life, just being born outside Aurora, and his father, Joseph Powell, a minister there in Palmyra, he migrated into Illinois, kind of behind, the church migration. And then he came out to the west. He was over Indian Affairs. He was
that when he did a big trip down the Colorado and the Grand Canyon and so forth.
He was down in the Four Corners area looking for reservation sites for
to place the Indians on them.
Yes.
Okay.
In fact, it's just interesting that he came out to Utah, meeting with various Indian tribes. And actually, his only child was born in Ogden, Utah, on one of his trips out here. And he was deeply concerned with how the Mormon culture was all about creating settlements all over. And he thought, that we were doing a land grab. Yeah. And so later, he became over the U.S. Geological Survey Department.
Yeah.
And really shut down. In fact, the reason why we have something like 61% of the state of Utah is owned by the federal government. You can credit John Wesley Powell.
Yeah. That's Lake Powell in Utah was named after him.
Lake Powell, and but the public lands that are here is really.
Well, can we revisit just one thing just a little bit before we go on to that? Is Lewis Henry Morgan? So who is he?
Lewis Henry Morgan became one of the most powerful men in the sciences. And it was really...
He and Powell actually kind of started the Bureau of Ethnology together, and they were kind of in cahoots with this whole thing.
Yes. And in fact, John Wesley Powell, after running the mighty Colorado, he became actually a national folk hero, as his stories and encounters with the Indians and the Mormons became legendary. As he would return to the east to find his professional home there in Washington, D.C., where he became director over the Ethnology Department of the Smithsonian. He became director over the U.S. Geological Survey Department and director over mound building and exploration. And
he had the ear of almost every president of the United States ever until his death.
Right? And had a profound influence on how these artifacts would be classified.
And also how the Indians would be viewed.
Yes. I mean, really, how we view and value the Indians are a result, of this. Now, these men believed, that these evolutionary ideas into the science of man would provide an emancipation, of traditional family beliefs, religious dogmas, could be used, to change and create a whole new morality for society.
Kind of a godless society. No need to invoke God because things just happen by random chance.
Raising science, above religion is really what they understood. And so in Washington, D.C., while he was there, he actually created the Cosmos Club.
Yeah, that's right. He did.
In which was a think tank there. But, John Wesley Powell's biographer stated that the man that in fact understood it was this one-armed little man with a bristly beard, a homemade education, an intense concentration of purpose. When he assumed the joint dictatorship of two bureaus, which he had created, he controlled a good part of the science of man and the science of the earth, and he conceived both in the broadest possible terms. So did he understand it? Yes. And then William DeBuy's biographer and editor of Powell's book, and you'll like the title of this, it's called Seeing Things Whole, because he really believed that he was seeing whole. No question
they saw the bigger picture.
Yeah. I mean, they had a master plan, on how they were going to see the direction that America should be, moving towards.
Well, Powell was actually so confident in his ability to see things greater than everybody else did that. What did they do when he passed away, when he died?
Powell, interesting enough, actually spoke at Lewis Henry Morgan's funeral. Uh-huh. I mean, they were very, very close. Now, Lewis Henry Morgan, was, as his William DeBuy's, Powell's, the editor of Powell's book says, that one of the thinkers in whom Powell drew most heavily from was Lewis Henry Morgan, a founder of modern anthropology and, like Powell, a native son of Western New York. So these two men, and what Morgan came up with, was the stages of human evolution, that man evolved from savagery to barbarism onto civilization. Seeing the Indians as savages.
So they had this evolutionary stairway.
Seeing the Indians as savages and seeing fundamental religions as barbaric on this progression towards a more civilized state. And so as John Wesley Powell, as it states, inspired by the writings of Morgan on these stages of human evolution, as director of the Bureau of Ethnology at the Smithsonian, he began to realize that he could use these evolutionary concepts of the origin of man as this tool for social reform. Quote, that Powell's, that every variant could be placed somewhere on this evolutionary stairway gave direction and systems to Powell's work in ethnology. And emerging from this evolutionary stairway would be the enthronement of Darwinism, creating a whole new vision for society, as they would begin to view the origin of man and the origin of society through this lens of evolutionary thought, changing how society has come to view and value the American Indian, for example. Not seeing the Indian, from a more advanced culture.
As a human equal to Europeans.
Yes. Yeah. And how you viewed the mound-building cultures. You had to view the mound-building cultures that would be viewed as the ancestors, of the Indian, as a culture that's hadn't advanced, and thus it gives you rights to gather up the Indians and take their lands from them.
This is a terrible advertisement our government put out. Indian land for sale. Get a home of your own, perfect title, possession within 30 days. Find lands in the West. By 1894, the mound investigation and archaeological digs had ceased. With the Indians now considered savages, it was easier to convince people that Native Americans needed to be put away on reservations.
And so you have this evolutionary idea that was being inserted into this debate to take the lands from the Indians. And
let's also dealt with the value of children, the belief in God. You just mentioned Charles Darwin. Did he have any influence then? I mean, how was he influencing? How was Darwinian evolution influencing these men?
Well, actually, Lewis Henry Morgan traveled to England and met with Charles Darwin. And
they had several letters back and forth, too.
Yes, and then he came back and wrote his most notable works, Ancient Society, where he came up with these stages of human evolution. I mean, seeing...
And that book became kind of like the handbook of instructions for dealing with the Native Americans.
Yes.
By the United States government. They used his book and say, well, according to this book, they started off as ignorant savages. They move up to barbarism, up to civilization. And of course, the Native Americans were then labeled as
savages.
Ignorant savages.
Yes. And then you don't have to give them rights under the constitutional law because they really hadn't evolved to...
They weren't really humans yet.
Full humans.
Yeah. So evolution is so racist, it's ridiculous.
Yes.
But yeah.
I mean, it really is when you look at it and how it's been used, as an effective tool. And as you mentioned, you can put almost everything on this evolutionary stairway. How we view and value, children. I mean, are they divine creatures touched by the finger of God?
The carbon footprints using up all the resources of the earth.
That's right. We can board them. We can do whatever because they're just another animal in the animal kingdom.
Yeah.
Or how about how we view marriage, for example, through this evolutionary lens? Mm-hmm. I mean, as you view marriage, is marriage divine? Okay.
Is it sanctioned by a god? Is there even a god?
Yeah. I mean,
who sanctioned marriage if there's no God?
And if you look through that lens. It's definitely not ordained of God, marriage. You can define it any way that you want. And how about the family? I mean, is that eternal creation or not? Looking through that lens changes how we view and value many things in society today and is having a huge effect on what's being advanced in the policy arena of this world today.
So some of these different things might be called, for example, secularism.
Yes.
And humanism.
Well, you have
and Marxism,
isms,
and communism, and socialism. All of these isms,
secularism, humanism, communism. You have socialism. You have all of these that really came off this period of time. I mean, in the 1800s. Okay, there was a vortex of evolutionary, revolutionary, and revelatory thought that was taking place. That was as a result of these evolutionary ideas. I mean, this is where social Darwinism, really got its footing, and was implemented, really around the world, and even the communist and the socialism, ideologies that are shared worldwide really came from these men. I mean, it was really interesting, okay?
For the origins here.
Yes, I was building a hotel in Palmyra, New York.
And by the way, we love.
Yes, and all of a sudden...
We used to anyway.
We had to sell it. But Rod and Wayne May showed up at my office one day. And they said, Steve, we heard that you have a hotel in Palmyra, New York. And we have all of these artifacts that really needs to get out there. And, people come, to Palmyra to see the pageant and
church history sites.
Yeah, and really look into history. And we need to have something on our history. And he says, I don't really even understand, your history, okay, and these ancient, mound building cultures, but I am very interested in what you're saying.
Yeah.
And after a few meetings with them, okay, they says, well, could you spare a room that we could do a museum there?
Spare room.
So I says, well, that's one night stay for how many months? For 4 or 5 years. And so we took that room and we made it into a museum.
Made these beautiful displays and everything, and it's just awesome.
Yes.
Called the what'd you call it again?
Well,
Ancient American History Museum.
It was fantastic. In this Palmyra hotel that we had there, and but as I was going back and forth, in the construction of this, I really, started to wonder, well, where did these things take place, as far as the wars and the battles. And, time and time again, I read in the Book of Mormon that they passed through Cumorah there. and as they called it. And so on one afternoon, I decided to get in my car and to drive up a country mountain road up to Bristol Mountains, because I thought that would be the lookout place. That if I was there, that I would be looking over the valley, and that's really close to Rochester and Palmyra, New York, where I saw an advertisement for a bookstore advertising old and rare books. And so I turned into this driveway.
Well, I tell you what, if you want to track our attention,
turn of the
just say old and rare books.
That's right. That's right. Just zoom in to that. And so I pulled into this driveway that pulled up around this turn of the century home, and there he had just an incredible barn that was climate controlled. And I walked in, and it was a huge library of old and rare books from the floor to the ceiling. And so I walked in there, and this was, just early afternoon. And I was there, until he
rest of the day.
Came back later. He says, "I'm going to go back and get dinner, and I'll come and let you out." And I gathered a number of books there. But one of the books that I got there was this particular book, and it kind of put me on another interesting path. It's called The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And then right below it, it says, in light of the researches of Lewis Henry Morgan. So here was Frederick Ingalls, and later I found, Karl Marx, both credited, the insights that they put into the Communist Manifesto to the insights and the researches of Lewis Henry Morgan that they put right in the front cover.
Wow.
And so being put on this evolutionary staircase that you can place anything on that, and really changing how we view and value these ancient civilizations. And how we view the American Indian.
Their doctrines and everything. It basically undermines the entire, the scriptures, really. It undermines the Bible in a huge way.
And since we had already produced a couple documentaries on the family, I go, they're talking about the origin of the family, private property rights, and the state. And how foundational that is. Is private property, important for a free nation? Yeah. Yes. How about the origin of the family? Can't even have a great nation if you don't have respect for law. And we're better than at the knees of a mother and a father are children taught the importance of respect for property and other people's property. And if you have this disintegration of the family, which has taken place worldwide, then you get the things that we are seeing in our cities today. It is really sad, but it's really foundational if we want to have a free country.
Yep, exactly. So there's a couple of other quick things here that we wanted to talk about. I mentioned earlier in the podcast that we had the map by Cyrus Thomas and so forth, and then we talked about there's another book though, and you brought a copy here with you.
Oh.
That was published in 2016, and when we were back on one of the tours, I said, "Steve, you've got to look at this book." It's called The Illustrated Encyclopedia of Native American Mounds and Earthworks by Gregory L. Little.
Yes, and Rod, came up to me and he says, "Steve, you got to see this. You got to see it." Okay, and he drags me, into the back, corner of the room, and I says, "See what?" And he pulled out this book and he says, "You can't believe what this record is of these ancient cultures of North America." And this Dr. Gregory Little, published this in 2016.
Yep.
And
with some updates.
Yes.
More recently.
And he shared on the introduction page of this book that it's dedicated to some 57 million Native Americans who lived on this American continent when Columbus showed up on the Bahamas shores in 1492. He hadn't made it, to the mainland yet, but he was coming our direction anyway, stating that their amazing legacy remains one of the most unappreciated archaeological treasures in the world. And we believe that it is. I mean, this record is a great treasure that needs to be studied. And it isn't, for the same social engineering ideas, that they had back in the 1800s and at the time that they really scienced this ancient history. I mean, this is a 508-page encyclopedia.
I see that.
With over 100,000, as he said, that he believes still remain these earthworks.
In fact, this is one of the reasons why I wanted Steve to check this book out, because it's right here. It's on page page 3, I think it is here. Just let me get it open to the right page here. Yeah, it's on page 3 in the introduction. He says, it says, how many mounds are there? He says, the most common question that is asked about mounds is how many exist. In the 1800s, the Smithsonian sponsored many expeditions to identify mound sites across America. A map, reproduced here in greatly reduced form, was published by Cyrus Thomas in 1894 in the Bureau of Ethnology book. They found approximately 100,000 mound sites, many with complexes containing 2 to 100 mounds. The figure of 100,000 mounds once existing, based on the Cyrus Thomas map, revealing 100,000 sites, is often cited by others. But that estimate is far, far too low. After visiting several thousand mounds and reviewing all of the literature, I am fairly certain that over, get this folks, 1 million mounds. Mounds once existed and perhaps 100,000 still exist. Yeah. So there you go. I mean, so over 1 million mounds. I mean, does this sound like a small civilization to you?
Yes. I mean, back when John Wesley Powell was over the Bureau of Ethnology for the Smithsonian, where he hired, as you can see on this slide, Cyrus Thomas, that he worked with in Illinois, and brought him to Washington, D.C. to work under him. Up and down these waterways of America's heartland, you see that even back then they understood that there was, thousands of these giant earthwork constructions, mounds, fortifications. And then you can still go to them. I mean, on these photos that you see here, we have up in the right-hand corner, you have in Ohio.
There,
yes,
Chillicothe.
It's called Mound City, Ohio. They have a great museum there.
Yep.
And then, I'm on the top of the mound in the lower right-hand corner, and that is Moundville, Alabama. Mm-hmm. They have 9, still beautiful, iconic mounds. At one time, they had, a lot more than that. And then we have this picture of Monk's Mound in Cahokia. This is located across the river in St. Louis, and that is bigger in its footprint than the Great Pyramid of Giza. And so
17 acres. In fact, I've got my. If you notice, I happen to have my Cahokia Mounds shirt on today.
So put your hand over your
Hopefully
heart.
You've noticed over the course of doing these podcasts, I've had different shirts on with different things that
yes,
relate to each individual thing. Yes. So you're going to love the Zelf one that's coming up here.
I will. Okay. That brings us close to home. Yeah. Now, really from the Copper Age to the Bronze Age on to the Iron Age, almost every ancient explorer of ancient times, was in pursuit of precious metals, found in rich abundance here in America's heartland. And this shows, as you look at this, that there were a lot of people that had the ships, that trade was taking place, mm-hmm. and a lot of copper was being mined and shipped to foreign shores. Now, according to the biblical timeline, there were many cultures that really had ships anciently. I mean, as he was explaining, Noah. I mean, he built a giant barge, about 4,300 years ago.
Yeah, I think people have known how to build a ship ever since then.
Yes. Okay. And found in 1 Kings chapter 5 is a story of King Solomon.
Yeah.
Who had amassed a large naval force. At the same time in history, he is the Queen of Sheba, the Queen of Egypt and Ethiopia, was credited of having over 400 seafaring vessels capable of braving the ocean worldwide. Now, besides the routes being established, both east and west, how about the ones north and south? I mean, if they were trading all over, okay, and there was cultures here in Central and South America, I mean, what were they trading? And there was many things that were being traded, both north and south. I mean, first of all, in the Hopewell Mounds, you find obsidian.
Yeah.
And really, in the heartland, we don't find hardly any obsidian.
Well, yeah, there's really no volcanic anything in the heartland. So this obsidian turns out
you could go to the Rocky Mountains and maybe find some, but the likelihood is it was traded up and down the major waterways where trade routes would be established.
In fact, some of the places on this map here. If you follow the Missouri River and you go all the way up, it goes up into basically what is now Yellowstone area.
Yes.
And some of this obsidian that they have found in Ohio actually came from Yellowstone. They know it's the same. It's from the same source material.
But I would basically say that with the trade networks that were being established, I mean it's a nice little float trip. Coming down the Mississippi, the Missouri, Tennessee. I mean they can float down to the Gulf of Mexico and be at Tulum and Chichen Itza and have be trading partners.
See, another interesting thing about these rivers, they're so big and there's so much water coming down them and so forth that they're so wide that they're typically not very fast flowing, so you can actually easily paddle upstream on these rivers.
Yes, and if you really look at where these giant earthen constructions are in relationship to the water, I mean, what is kind of revealed is that these rivers were a lot larger before they started draining them, with all the development and everything that's taken place, the dams and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, they were seas, okay? They were very, very large, okay, as you could easily migrate down these seas, to the Gulf of Mexico.
Well, many of these rivers are over a mile wide.
Yeah,
I mean, so they're huge. That's the Cyrus Thomas map.
Yeah, the Cyrus Thomas map that shows,
these were just sites, and many of those sites had multiple mounds on them.
Yes, and you find that these are located on the major riverways of America's heartland. Exactly. This is kind of give you a depiction with Missouri River, the Ohio, the Mississippi, how wide possibly, was the Mississippi River back in the day.
Or as we like to call it, the River Sidon system.
Yes. And the thing is, I mean, for example, we took this picture at the Okamoki Mound site. And that is, down in the deep south.
Yeah.
And what you have there is this copper and that. Really came from the areas that were rich in minerals, such as Ohio and Mississippi and up into the Great Lakes area.
Yeah.
And so there was just a lot of things.
Well, just like on your slide here, basically, there's a book called Michigan Copper.
Yes.
By non-LDS people. These are geologists and so forth, and they figured there was over 500,000 tons of copper were removed from the Keweenaw Peninsula up there in Lake Superior. Anciently, they have no idea where all that copper went to.
Yeah, I mean, there was over 5,000 mines just, in that one little region.
And this was using this kind of stone. This is what they're doing.
I would hate to be in the mines trying to pull these things out.
They're working that copper out of those mines with stone implements, and this actually came from one of those. Wayne May helped me to get this particular one. It actually came from one of those mines up in the Keweenaw Peninsula.
Yes, and also what was traded, was the tobacco, a native crop of the Americas, which was being cultivated in the heart of the Hopewell country. Now, the tobacco was really in great demand, commonly traded like money is today.
Yeah.
I mean,
tobacco leaves.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the one thing that's really interesting is that you had these platform pipes, which is signature Hopewell. Mm-hmm. And so where do you find some of these signature pipes? Oh, well, you find some down in Central and South America. Okay. So were they trading partners? Well, you got to think so. You really got to think that they were trading partners. So the Hopewell culture built these huge earthworks. But what happened, okay, as we start to categorize, okay, and put in a chronological order as we go and visit these different sites, you realize that come around about 400 to 500 AD, that everything came grinding to a stop. Yeah. I mean, both the cultures, of the Hopewell and the Adena, came grinding to a halt to the point that something must have been happening. Yeah, some kind of genocide, or
and even the Adena culture, basically theirs kind of came to a halt even just before, probably right around 100 AD.
Yeah, or some merging of some of the cultures.
Something like that. And then you have the Hopewell culture, basically, that came in afterwards, and all of a sudden their road building, their city building, all of that just abruptly just ends.
Yes. And so if a genocide was taking place, and some kind of altercation, and as we read in the Book of Mormon, that cities were being burnt down, okay, and people were being carried off, into slavery, and all these things were happening, and you were concerned, and you had really probably migrated up from the south to these more mineral-rich areas up to the north. Yeah. What would happen? You'd jump into a boat, a sailing raft, or whatever you could, and you would take flight.
Head out.
And where would your flight be? It's a flight, to safety.
Yeah.
You would head down one of these major riverways or waterways.
Yeah. Let me throw in a couple of quick things here, though, because in this, now this is the DVD that I did a couple of years ago. It's called the Hinterland Hypothesis. So I'll put that up so you can kind of see it. It's basically called American Core, or Heartland Core, Mesoamerican Periphery. This is reconciling Book of Mormon geography theories. There's been people who thought, well, in fact, there's been presidents of the church have gone down into Central and South America and Southern Mexico and so forth, and dedicated temples to people who they said were the descendants of Lehi.
Yes.
How can that be if the Book of Mormon actually happened here in North America? This DVD explains that all, because around 800 to 900 AD, the Mayan civilization collapsed. They came up here into North America at Okmulgee mounds and Cahokia mounds, these massive earthworks. The earlier Hopewell mound builder people, they didn't build gigantic, massive earthworks like that. These were astounding. These were ones that were 17 acres in the base and rise over 100 feet high, like Monk's Mound. This was, Wayne May asked the Native American chieftain, he said, who built Cahokia?
Well,
and you want to go ahead?
Well, one of the most obscure topics, really not discussed in the ancient American history books, was the ancient American Indian slave trade that was taking place. And it was taking place, to both North and South America. Throughout history, we find, that every giant earthen construction of ancient times was built under the yoke of slave labor, from the Great Pyramids of Egypt to the Great Colosseums of Rome to the Great Wall of China. And to all these giant earthen constructions of Central and South America, they all used slave labor. How common was slavery among the Indian populations? Well, some historians believe that the ancient populations of North America were heavily involved in the slave business in one way or another, either as slavers or as captives. Mm-hmm. And so there was a huge market, especially in the building of these giant earthen constructions. Now, the Native American tribes really held slaves even prior and during the European colonization. It's really interesting. Even as the LDS saints came into Utah, it was the Indians that would come up and try to sell slaves to them. And so that was a real tradition, in these cultures. Now, one of the new, insights that I felt we really need to understand that after about AD 200, that these slave trade routes were well established, and there was a lot of things going on. So did the Mayas, the Olmecs, the Toltecs, the Aztecs, okay, these did they do Indian raids and carry some of these Indians off? You know, we talk about a depopulation of the American Indian. Did they carry them off to Central and South America and use them to build their giant pyramids and giant earthen constructions? I mean, did that take place? And like the children of Israel, I mean, would they hold to their religious teachings? And would those teachings be manifest in their art and their architecture? So would you see signs and symbolisms, okay, that foretold, you know, of where they came from? And do we see that both North, South, and Central America? Okay, and do we see it in North America? You can see some of the same symbolisms, okay, temple symbolisms, the view, you know, and symbolisms of the plan of salvation.
And plans of salvation, like in the like the Newark earthwork complex with the entire plan of salvation.
How about the tree of life?
Yeah, the tree of life stuff.
The tree of life. You see those both north, south, you know, America, and so the trade networks, you know, were huge, and so. That really needs to be understood, that, you know, how were these giant earthen constructions built? Well, somebody doesn't wake up one morning and say, I'm going to go out and build this giant, massive earthen construction. Okay. They usually have, you know,
I think some centralization of power.
A spear, you know, to the back or something. You know, some power. Yes. You are going to build these giant earthen constructions, and they did it under the yoke of slavery.
And there's actually ample evidence of that. In fact, I have several quotes from mainstream archaeologists and so forth about this area. So basically around about 800 or 900 AD, the Mayan civilization had what they called the Great Collapse. They came up here into North America. They found the Lamanites up here in North America, which they had just killed off the Nephites about 400 years before that. So now they had separated off into individual family units they called tribes. The Mayans came up as a cohesive army, enslaved the Lamanites for 300 years, according to the chieftains here. Wayne May was talking to some chieftains. And they said, "Who built Cahokia?" He said, "Well, we built it, but we built it as slaves." They said, "Slaves to who?" And he said, "The Snake people came up from the south, and they enslaved us for 300 years, and then we were able to overthrow them, drive them back out of their land, out of our lands. They intermarried with us for 300 years, and they brought a lot of that Lamanite bloodlines back with them down into Central and South America, which is how the Lamanite population got down there. But it was nothing to do with the Book of Mormon time frames. It was after.
Yes, well, and that's a story, you know, that has been told over and over again. I mean, we had Dr. Franklin Kiel, the director of the Eastern Area Office of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, for the U.S. government. And he had oversight over 28 Indian nations. Now, Franklin shared, you know, with us a couple stories, you know. So he is Native American. And he was telling, as he was going around, okay, to these various tribes, you know, that this story. And he says the story that he heard over and over again was the story of wicked King Noah. As found in the Book of Mormon, where King Noah was a wicked priest and did tribal raids, and he carried off the women and children, and basically he says that is a story that was duplicated. In fact, over and over again.
In the Cherokee National Museum, or the Museum of the Cherokee in Cherokee, North Carolina, they have a thing they call the story of the Nicotani, which is about that there was a priestly class of people. And of men, and they basically abducted a bunch of women and so forth, and so they basically hunted them down and they killed them. these priestly men. It's basically the story of King Noah and his wicked priests, and how they took over. You know, they absconded with some of the Lamanite daughters of the Lamanites and so forth, and then they ultimately, you know, were hunted down and killed.
Yes.
But yes, they call it the story of the Nicotani.
Yeah, the slave trade that was going on anciently, you know, is something that really answers a lot of questions on how these civilizations, okay, were able to grow, and and really what happened, anciently, that some of the civilizations were gathered up and carried off to other parts. But thus, it kind of answers, the question that how you could find, a little bit of DNA in both north, south, and east, in all parts.
Yeah, but later
because
on.
Usually,
yeah,
yes,
because there's no Hebrew DNA anywhere in Central America during the Book of Mormon time frames.
Yes, yeah,
but only in North America.
Yes, and a lot of these giant earthen constructions.
And by the way, if you'd like to know a little bit more about that one, I also brought
DNA.
The Rediscovering the Book of Mormon Remnant Through DNA, which is one of the first books I wrote on the DNA subject. There, basically, we got that.
That answers a lot of questions.
And you can. It's about 160 something pages. It's all referenced. There's about 200 and something references in the back here. But you can also download this for free off of our website, off of bookofmormonevidence.org. You can go to the downloads page and just download the whole book for free, or you can get a hard copy if you want to as well.
I mean, it's pretty amazing that you find a haplogroup X DNA that's showing of Hebrew descent, in both the Hopewell mounds, the Adena, and even, some of the more northern Indians, of the Iroquois and the Algonquin tribes.
Yeah. Now, I mentioned before, we got to wrap this up here, but I mentioned before about some of the artifacts and so forth that were made of copper. In the Book of Ether, it talks about that they had mighty, huge mounds of earth that they moved in order to get the ore and the copper. This is from the Keweenaw area. Basically, there's the copper scraper that you can see here, which is the copper turns kind of a green color when it oxidizes and so forth there. But this is quite a rare thing to have a full-size scraper that's not been bent over and so forth. This is actually a necklace. And I don't know if you can see this very well here, but basically there's individual beads. They are graduated up. They get smaller, and then they get bigger and bigger over here. And then you also have like kind of a pendant thing over here. It actually has holes drilled into it. You can actually see the pendant there a little bit. And then at the bottom there, right there, that kind of looks like a bar. It actually is hollow. It's a long tube made out of copper that they did with this, and again you can kind of see some of the different beads here, the different sizes of beads as they get kind of bigger and bigger. This is actually found. It was basically, they think it was a necklace, and it was all found intact there in the Keweenaw Peninsula. And then last but not least, this is a knife. It's a copper knife. Basically, you can kind of see the tang of the knife over here on this side. And basically just a really nice example of a knife this is from the Adena culture. This is jaredite stuff.
Well, as you can see, they all traded in precious metals.
Yeah.
Now in Ether chapter 10 verse 33, it reads. Would you like to?
Getting it really quickly.
Okay.
Here. Ether chapter 10 verse 33. It's right here. It says, and in the days of Kam, there began to be robbers in the land, and they adopted the old plans, and administered oaths after the manner of the ancients, and sought again to destroy the kingdom.
That idea, that they are duplicating something that has been done over and over again. I mean, basically talking about, the manner of the ancients.
Yeah.
That this idea, is duplicated over civilization after civilization. Probably started, as we know, in the pre-moral existence, as the War of Heaven, took place there in the rebellion. But this is a prototype of possibly even what's happening in our day.
Yeah, for sure.
So now, what is America's decision towards Christ?
And what is our destiny? Because our destiny is completely tied to this decision.
Yes. And as has a majority of Americans, are they accepting Christ? Do they choose Christ? So where does America stand today?
Well, I think the Book of Mormon gives us a pretty good warning.
It gives us a very strong warning. Are we accepting Christ or are we rejecting Christ? into today's world.
Well, let's turn back to early on in the Book of Mormon, clear back to 1 Nephi. And chapter 14, and in verse 6, this is on page 25 of the annotated Book of Mormon. It says, "Therefore, woe be unto the Gentiles, if it so be that they harden their hearts against the Lamb of God. For the time cometh, saith the Lamb of God, that I will work a great and marvelous work among the children of men, a work which will be everlasting, either on the one hand or on the other." What are the two hands? Either to the convincing of them unto peace and life eternal.
Exactly.
Or, number 2, unto the deliverance of them to the hardness of their hearts and the blindness of their minds, unto their being brought down into captivity.
You know, he gives us our agency.
And also to destruction.
And he holds that agency supreme. Okay? Yeah. We, as a people, can choose. What are we choosing today?
So the second choice is captivity, destruction, both temporally and spiritually, according to the captivity of the devil, of which I have spoken. Now, that is an interesting aspect of it, because basically, if we do not uphold the laws of God on this covenant and promised land called America,
yes,
then we will be responsible, basically, for Christ having to withhold the special blessings that were given to this land for the purpose of bringing the gospel to all the other nations of the earth. It's not going to be pretty. We've been blessed more than any other nation,
yes,
in the history of mankind. And when we basically reject God, when we are the ones who are killing more babies, even if they're born healthy, and if we're the ones who are going to basically promote those kind of ideas within our government, then we will be responsible for the judgments of God which are about to come upon us.
Yeah, there's all kinds of forms of captivity. And you can be captive, you know, in many different ways, and we'll learn of even new ways, okay, that we will be captive to the wills of man, as we have social engineers today. Just like there was, you know, back in the Nephite days and the day of Jaredites. This is a replication of what has happened, you know, in the past, and what God has warned us so often about.
So how do you, this is just the last couple things here, how do you enslave people? You offer them free stuff. This is how heroin dealers do it, how drug dealers do it. You basically say, well, here's some free stuff. Yes. And then you get them hooked on the free stuff, and then you basically say, well, now you can't just keep getting free stuff.
Yes.
Now, in the case of Darwinism, what would they want to be free of? They wanted to be free of the shackles of God, the shackles of the commandments
of marriage,
and so forth. That men can just procreate with any old person. They're not responsible for their actions and so forth. They're free to do whatever they want to do.
Yes.
So whenever somebody's offering you free stuff, you need to take a hard look at it and say, why are they offering free stuff?
Yeah,
because there's no free lunch.
Yeah.
Nobody gets a free lunch.
You know, in closing, there are those who would seek to close the history books on man's experiences, history that shows weakness, shortcomings, and prejudices, and man's inhumanity to man. In the pursuit of a better world, if these past histories are lost and forgotten, then we may well be destined to repeat some of the grossest failures and atrocities of the past. It is, you know, our hope, and I know our prayer, that these ancient voices from the dust, okay, may once again be heard, because they have something to share with us. And I hope that our ears will be attuned, you know, to the understanding of these great cultures, so we won't duplicate, you know, what happened to these cultures.
Which causes me to circle right back to the very beginning. One of the first questions that I asked you was, why is history important? That's the reason why. So we don't go down the same roads and make the same mistakes. But I'm afraid we're doing it.
Yes. we are at a critical crossroads here, and we hope that we may first come to understand and share this with others so they can see that this is a replication of things that have happened in the past are happening today. And as we turn to the Book of Mormon and the Scriptures, it bears testimony of that.
Yeah. Listen, thank you, Steve, for coming in and being a part of this this podcast. I've been holding off. I wouldn't necessarily say saving the best for last, but you are definitely one of the best, and I sure appreciate you coming and being a part of this. Folks, we have some really great podcasts still coming up here before the end of the year. We've got in the next couple of weeks, we're going to have, for example, Lori Bean Henderson, who's the direct descendant that her grandfather was Willard Bean, who actually was the one who helped to obtain the Hill Cumorah, the real one and only
right there
Hill
in Palmyra.
Right there in Palmyra. We have many. You're going to love some of these last presentations, these last podcasts that we're doing. We're hoping you're enjoying these podcasts. If you can, give us a thumbs up or whatever there on these things. We appreciate you taking the time to watch these. And we know that these are kind of long, but hopefully you'll share them with others and send them out to people. There's some really, really good information here. And Steve, I want to thank you for all your effort and time, and for you've spent literally just thousands of hours pouring through these books and finding out this information so you could glean that so that you guys can get this in just in literally a condensed format. That you can learn about these things quickly and efficiently, and share them with your loved ones. Gospel is true. Book of Mormon is true. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
You can find the new virtual expo at bookofmormonevidencestreaming.com. We advertise 60 new videos, but actually almost double that amount, so you'll have plenty of inspiration to carry you through the fall and into the holiday season. Don't miss out on more than 110 new videos now in our library. Special guest speakers are Glenn Beck, David Barton, and Tim Ballard. You'll have access for 3 whole months, as well as receiving 2 bonuses that will offset your complete subscription cost. The first is The Destruction of Christ's Death, which is a 2-hour streaming video by Rod Meldrum, which is a $20 value, as well as his new 40-page ebook called Prophecies and Promises. What Did Joseph Know? That's a $15 value. We're excited for you to join us.